So when we talk about these PC builds, we talk a lot about their gaming performance, but one of the nice things about building a PC is that it can do so much more than that. So let's take a look at what it takes to put together a small PC that's not only going to give you some of the highest gaming performance available today, but it's also ideal for creative and productivity tasks, starting with the CPU. I'm going to be going with the Ryzen 7 7950X3D. This is a PC aimed around productivity and gaming. As far as flagship CPUs go, this is easily my choice when both of those use cases are important to you. We've got 16 cores and 32 threads with a boost clock up to 5.7 gigahertz. Now this is one of the best available from AMD right now. But that doesn't come cheap. When this was first released, the sticker price was $700. Now it's come down quite a bit since then, and you can now pick it up for around $575, which is right in the price range of the 14900K. Now, both those perform similarly in most situations, with the Intel chip slightly outperforming it in nearly every category, except in an area that is pretty important when building small: thermals and power consumption. Now, the 7950X3D is easily the more power efficient chip, and that translates to temperatures as well. While I think the cooler that I'll be using in this build could handle it, power efficiency and lower temps are a big priority to me due to just the nature of this channel. So for that, I choose the 7950X3D. Now, Intel's also having some issues with their power spec, and it's causing crashes in games. Now, I'm sure this is going to be resolved at some point, but it is something just to note for now. I also have a hard time recommending Intel at this point in time, just because the 1700 socket is really on its last leg. The 14th gen CPUs are supposed to be the last on the 1700 socket, and so that's gonna make upgradability a problem in the future. Now, with that said, there are some workloads that are highly optimized around Intel, and those are pretty valid reasons to go with Intel. Now, if you're wanting some less expensive options, I would take a look at the 7700X on AMD or the 13600K on Intel. So when it comes to your motherboard, it's really not gonna make a difference when it comes to gaming or productivity performance. Rather, you just wanna make sure that it has all the connectivity that you're gonna need. So for this build, I'm gonna be going with the Gigabyte B650i Aorus Ultra. Now, as far as I/O goes, I think this has got us completely covered with 7 USB ports, one of them being Type-C, Wi-Fi 6E, and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. Then we have these large heatsinks that are actively cooled, but the main reason I chose this board specifically is the M.2 support. I believe that this is the only mini ITX AM5 board that has 3 M.2 slots. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen any others. We have 2 slots under this front heatsink, and then the last spot is on the back under the backplate, which this is gonna be very useful to expand the system with plenty of fast storage. So I like to shoot my videos in a codec that uses an intra compression format. Because that format is less compressed compared to ones like H.265, the recording files become very large, and I'll fill up a terabyte of storage with almost every video I create. So having 3 slots to expand in the system is gonna make my life so much easier when I'm working on or switching between multiple projects. Now, one of the downsides to this board, and it's not unique to this board alone, is that with these mini ITX boards that have, a ton of features, you begin to run out of space on the board itself to fit everything. The solution here has been to introduce daughter boards and dongles. Now that can make things a little bit confusing, ugly, and complicated, but overall it's a small price to pay to have so much crammed on a small board. As far as the RAM goes, we're gonna be going with a kit from Corsair. We've got 64 gigs of DDR5 6000 from their Vengeance lines. So pretty low profile sticks here, although you don't necessarily need this low clearance for how I'm configuring it here. But for me, I've been really happy with this set in the past, and they fit with basically any cooler. DDR5 6000 is the perfect speed when it comes to cost, stability, and performance, and I really wouldn't recommend anything more than that for most people. Now, while you can see some benefits in productivity applications at higher speeds, like when I use the 7200 MHz kit in my ultimate productivity build, most people are gonna be better off just sticking to 6000. And for gaming, there's really no reason to go any faster. The more important thing here is gonna be the capacity. If you're working with really large image files or anything that needs to hold a lot of system memory, having enough will make a big difference to the overall speed. It's also important to remember that we only have 2 DIMM slots on this ITX board, so when it comes to adding more capacity, you'll have to outright replace the previous 2 sticks rather than adding an additional 2 like you would in a micro ATX or ATX board. Photoshop requires a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM, but recommends 32, same for Lightroom. 32 is also the recommendation to edit 4K video in Premiere, as well as the recommendation for Blender. Those are my personal main use cases, so for me, 32 is typically enough, but having more is certainly better than not having enough. I was wanting a new standing desk to use in the studio as a dedicated place to edit videos, test out new builds, and things like that, which worked out perfectly when FlexiSpot offered to sponsor this video and gave me the opportunity to try out one of theirs. So they didn't actually tell me what model they were gonna send before it arrived at my door. They only asked for what size I was looking for and things like that. And I gotta admit, I was pretty surprised by what they sent over. This is their E7 Plus, a premium 4-leg standing desk, and it's kinda wild what it can handle. It can hold up to 540 pounds while extending the height from as low as 26 inches from the ground up to 51.6. So even if you're not building small form factor like we mostly do on this channel and you have a massive, heavy, custom loop liquid cooled build on it, you're still gonna have no problems keeping it on the desk and adjusting the height. This is way overkill for my needs, but I'm definitely not complaining. It's incredibly stable and well built. Now, because I don't have a ton of room, I went with a smaller 48 by 30 size so that I could put it on casters and easily wheel it around as needed, but there are quite a few different options if you're wanting a different shape and you have more space than I do. It's also pretty nice to be able to program a few set height positions on the keypad so that once it's all set up with a single press, I can have it automatically adjust to my preferred sit or stand position. That's perfect for me. So if you're wanting to upgrade your desk to be more comfortable and productive, I can definitely recommend the FlexiSpot desk. I've been quite happy with mine so far. And if you use the code on the screen, you can save $50 on the E7 Plus. The case I'm gonna be going with is the Dan A4 H2O. This case has been around for a while now, and it's still a very popular option today. But I actually have not built in it myself yet. So this seemed like the perfect fit for a productivity build with its super clean, kind of professional look to it. I went with the silver version, but they also have it in black. Now, like I said, this case has been around for a few years, but even today, it's an impressively space optimized case. 11 liters in volume with your typical sandwich style layout. So we've got room for a 240 millimeter radiator at the top. Then you've got your motherboard and power supply on one side and room for a 3-slot GPU on the other. So getting in here, we first need to remove the 4 thumb screws on the back. And then the side panels are actually held in by push pins, which it's kind of strange to have push pins and thumb screws. I was actually expecting to pull the side panels back once I removed those thumb screws, but okay. Now the side panels and most of the case here are made of aluminum, and you can really tell that these are of high quality. Very little to no flex on the side panels, which are actually pretty thin, but still quite rigid. All right, so first we just need to remove the power supply bracket and the radiator bracket. And the first thing I want to install here is the AIO. So for the CPU cooler, I'm going to be going with the Cooler Master Atmos 240. I actually used this in my Formed T1 build, and I liked it quite a bit. We've got some very organized packaging, which makes installation a lot easier and straightforward with the AMD and Intel installation pieces that are in separate compartments. So that just helps make things a lot less confusing. Both those fans are standard thickness at 25 millimeters, and we have a 37 millimeter thick radiator, which works out perfectly because we only have 55 millimeters in clearance on the Dan case. Now this does come with an ARGB hub, but I'll actually just be plugging everything into the splitters, then directly into the motherboard. From there, I'll just be controlling the lighting directly from Gigabyte's control panel instead of downloading Cooler Master's master control software. Noise levels on this cooler are pretty moderate, definitely not loud, but they can be audible when the CPU's under a full load. I'm measuring around 42 decibels in the standard fan profile. Which is actually lower than the AC unit that's in my studio, so pretty much unnoticeable in my opinion. Now we can take that radiator bracket and install it to the top of the rad. Then we can just drop all of that through the top of the case. Actually quite easy, probably one of the easiest radiator installs in a small case that I've worked with so far. So now we're just gonna move all the cables and the pump out of the way to get ready to drop in our motherboard. So let's grab that, align it with the standoffs and then secure it. And I really love that they have the PCI Express riser cable already pre-installed here, so we can actually just plug that right on in. Okay, before everything starts to get more tight here when I install the pump block, I'm just gonna plug in all of my case cables and any other cables that might become hard to reach. So that's the USB 3 and C on the right-hand side here, along with the HD audio, which is on the bottom left. Now this is kind of hidden on this board under the M.2 heatsink, so we do need to remove that in order to plug it in. And then of course, let's not forget that power button. I also want to organize and plug in all the cables that we need for our radiator. And of course, because these fans are RGB, we have twice as many cables to deal with. So let's plug the fans into the splitter and then that into the fan header on the motherboard, then our RGB wires into the 3-way splitter and that into the RGB header on the motherboard as well. Now it's time to install the pump block to the motherboard. So this is also pretty straightforward. We'll just need to take off these default mounting brackets and replace them with these 4 standoffs, squeeze some thermal paste onto the CPU, and then we can lower that block onto the standoffs. Now I'm gonna try to position the block with the radiator tubes coming out the left side. I think that's gonna give us the cleanest tube run, which is gonna run up to the top of the case and then across. So now we just wanna make sure that we tighten these evenly on all 4 sides, and cool, now we're ready to install our power supply. So I'll be going with the Corsair SF750 for this build as well. I highly recommend it. It's one of the most reliable and well-made SFX power supplies available. You'll also likely not feel the need to pick up any custom cables with this one, as it comes with these really nice braided ones in the box, which are also pretty easy to work with. Now, I have some custom ones on hand, so I'm gonna be using some different ones for this build, but just know that you should be fine with the ones that come in the box. I'm also gonna be plugging in the power cables with the unit still outside of the case, because you're really not gonna have enough room to fit your hand underneath it to plug them all in once it's secured back into the case. Okay, so now we're on the other side, and I've done a little bit of cable management here. I've tucked away the case cables and the AIO cables kind of around the corners. That way they're gonna be as much out of the way as possible before we go and install our GPU. Now for this build, I'm gonna be going with the RTX 4080 Super Founders Edition. We can fit a triple slot card up to 322 millimeters in here, and these bigger Founders cards are around 310. So we should have no problems with the clearance. The main difference between this and the original 4080 is that the Super is on the full 8103 silicon, giving it faster memory and a small increase in core count. Now, this really only amounts to around a 5% increase in performance over the original 4080, which is honestly a very negligible uplift in performance, but the real difference here is in the price. The Super comes in at $1,000, which is $200 cheaper than the original 4080. At this $1,000 price point, you could also consider something like the 7900 XTX, but there is a major reason why I would easily choose the 4080 over any AMD card in a productivity machine, and that's due to NVIDIA CUDA cores, which are used to process and render video, images, along with other visual information. AMD has something similar called stream processors, but CUDA cores are typically better supported and they're just more efficient. So that makes Adobe programs like Premiere better optimized to work with NVIDIA GPUs, and 3D modeling performance significantly better as well. We also have 16 gigs of VRAM, which is overkill if you're gonna be doing photo editing and really any video editing at 4K or lower, but it will be very useful when using 3D modeling applications like Blender. The more the better here, so I do wish NVIDIA would have given us a bump to 20 gigs with the Super, as even AMD's $750 7900 XT has 20. And the only way to get more is by jumping up to the 4090, which is like $600 more MSRP. And it's pretty clever how they designed the GPU installation. We need to pop off the front panel, and then behind there, there's a large hole to slide the GPU in. This is so much easier than having to, remove like a corner bracket or something like other cases require when you're installing a larger GPU. So that part's pretty smart, but this is still a tight fit, and you don't want to snag any of the cables as you slide it through. I would say this is probably the most tedious part of the build so far, but I really just think that's because we're getting close to the size limit on what this case can actually fit. Okay, now that we've got this maneuvered into the PCI Express slot and secured to the case, we need to plug in the power cable. All right, all that's left to do here is to resecure our top, front, and side panels, and that's the build complete. It's pretty understandable how this case has maintained its popularity over the past few years. With pretty minimal effort, you have a very tidy looking build. The top guard that covers up the radiator and the fans cleans up the whole top half, and then the power supply unit bracket does a really nice job covering up all the cable mess that comes out of the bottom of your power supply. I feel like you couldn't make a build look bad in this case unless you really tried. The fitment on mine also looks perfect, no inconsistencies to the panel gaps or anything like that. Overall, very satisfied with the build quality and the build experience in this case. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.